In this box there is a circular polarising filter, a variable neutral density filter and a 1/4 black mist diffusion filter. But there's only one filter in the box. No, it's not some kind of quantum probability thing. It's a 3-in-1 filter. Interesting idea, but is it any good? And who, if anybody, would benefit from owning a filter like this? Well, I'm going to put it to the test and see if I can answer those questions. I hope you'll enjoy the video. If you do, and you're new here, don't forget to hit subscribe before you go. Let's start off with the disclaimer. I didn't pay for this filter. Kent Faith offered to send it to me to do a review on, and I was intrigued enough by it to say yes. However, the opinions you're going to hear are completely my own. I'm not being paid to give this a good review. In fact, I'm not being paid at all. And any links that I provide or discount codes that I provide do not make me any money, as I have declined to take part in any affiliate programs. This video is going to be in 5 chapters, and those chapters can be navigated using the bar in YouTube or by using the chapter descriptions in the video description, so you can skip bits if you want to. The first chapter, which we're doing now, is the introduction. In the second chapter, I'm going to explain what each of the filters does, and I suspect that some of you may want to skip that. In the third chapter, I am going to talk about the quality of the filter optically. So I'm going to take it out, do some photography with it purely to check the optical quality, to make sure it's not going to ruin the images by making them blurry or something like that. The fourth chapter, I'm going to be out actually using the creative components of this filter to capture some images and see how they work out. And the fifth chapter is going to be my final conclusions. And if you want to just skip to the final conclusions, of course you can do, but you won't have all the context of the previous stuff. What do these 3 different types of filters do? The circular polarizing filter, I often think, is the most important filter for any photographer to have and to own, because one of the things it does cannot be replicated in any kind of post-processing, because a circular polarizer can remove glare from water and wet surfaces, which you can't do in post-processing, and it can also take reflections out of water, allowing you to see what's underneath. Circular polarizers, used the right way and in the right conditions, can also increase saturation and contrast, particularly in the sky, but of course you can do that in post-processing. Neutral density filters reduce the amount of light coming into the lens, allowing you to extend the exposure time for longer exposures. In photography, a lot of the time we use fixed neutral density filters, so 3 stops, 6 stops, 10 stops, whatever. But you can also get variable neutral density filters that you can adjust from whatever the lowest setting is to the highest setting, and this particular filter goes from 1 stop to 5 stops. Variable neutral density filters are particularly useful for video because you can set the optimum aperture, ISO and shutter speed, and then just use the variable neutral density filter to control exposure. But variable ND filters also have a weakness, or historically and in some cases had a weakness, in that they can produce a very unpleasant vignette across the center of the image known as an X-cross, which basically ruins any image that you take with it because it's almost impossible to get rid of. So you can bet I'm going to be looking out for that in my quality test and other tests as well. Black mist diffusion filters have tiny black particles embedded in the filter material, and if you have a scene with a bright light source in a high contrast area, so bright sunlight coming through a woodland scene or street lights, for example, then it will soften and diffuse the light from that bright light source, creating what's often described as a bloom effect. And this can look quite cinematic. Okay, for this first test, I'm not bothered about trying to create a beautiful picture. I'm just picking a scene that I think will enable me to do the test that I want to do. And that test is basically one of quality. Does the filter adversely affect the quality of the images that I'm able to capture? So to do that, I'm going to take a control shot without the filter. Then I'm going to put the filter on. I'm going to make sure that the polarizer is dialed back to as close to nothing as it's possible. And I'm also going to put the variable ND filter on its lowest setting, which is 1 stop. Because of that, the exposure time will extend inevitably because of the ND filter adding 1 stop, and the polarizing element will probably also add a little bit. So maybe 1 1/3, 1.5 stops. But nothing else, because this scene has nothing that should, in theory, affect the black mist diffuser. So this is kind of a control test. I can take a shot without the filter, with the filter, and then I can compare them later side by side on the computer and see if there's any negative effect to putting the filter on. So we'll get that done now. First thing is the control shot. It's just a view down part of the river with some trees in the background, rocks in the foreground. Nothing exciting, as I said. Right, very basic shot. Now I'm going to put the filter on. So I requested a 77mm filter, even though this is a 72mm thread, because I prefer a slightly larger filter, reduces the possibility of vignetting at wide angles. So I've got an adapter ring already on here. I have the ND filter at its lowest setting, and then I shall check the view through the viewfinder because of the bright light, just to make sure that the polarizer isn't having a noticeable effect. And then we'll take the second shot. Okay, that was 1 stop difference, which is good. Because the variable ND was set at 1 stop. What we'll do now is I'm going to dial in the polarizer as far as it will go, just to see the effect that it has. Now, because I've got this screwed all the way in, when I rotate this, it only adjusts the polarizer. If I unscrew this, then it adjusts the ND filter. So let's see what happens with the polarizer. I'm not expecting a lot because of the position of the sun and the scene that I'm shooting. But as I said, this is a quality test. Okay, now I've got a shot with the polarizer dialed in as far as it will go. And I can do a quality check on that, again, looking at the 2 images side by side, just to see how they work. The next thing I want to do is I want to actually test the variable ND filter. Variable ND filters, as I said, do suffer from this dreaded X cross. So I really want to see whether I get that when I start dialing in the filter. If I unscrew this, loosen this off, that then allows the ring to rotate and adjust the ND filter rather than the polarizer. But if I'm going to be honest, there's still a bit of drag there, so you're not always getting a one-handed option. You've still kind of got to block off the filter, the polarizer a bit, to get the ND filter to work. So in theory you could do it one-handed, but there's a bit too much drag there at the moment for it to work. Okay, so I've locked this in at about 2.5 stops. I'm going to make sure that the polarizer is doing nothing. And now I'm going to dial in the full 5 stops. Now I am shooting this at about 30mm, so in a minute I'm going to go to 12mm just to check because that X-cross is much more noticeable wide angle. I think I'm just going to pop the camera on the tripod. I'm going to take you off the tripod, pop the camera on this tripod. It's a bit wobbly, but I want to put the 8mm lens on and just see if I get any vignetting this dreaded X-cross at 8mm, because if I'm going to get it anywhere, it's going to be that wide. 8-25 lens, 8mm. I'm going to dial in this. The video exposure takes a little bit of time to catch up, but it looks okay as far as I can tell. I'm not seeing any X-cross appearing there. Okay, so I'm back at home and I've got the images on the computer. As I said, they're not images I would bother sharing anywhere else. They're purely to do the quality check. Now, comparing the images that were shot with and without the filter, I can't see any difference in quality at all. They're equally as sharp. Looking at the images shot once I started dialing in the ND filter, again, there's no issue with colour at all, or with sharpness at all. Colour doesn't seem to be any difference that I can tell. And certainly at the 29mm mark that I was shooting at, there's no sign of the dreaded X-cross. I did shoot some video at 8mm with the ND filter dialed all the way in, and again I couldn't really see any issue with the vignetting, the X-cross, that would be of any concern there. The only thing that I did notice is that the difference between having the filter on 1 stop and 5 stops, which should be 4 stops of light difference, was actually only about 3 and a bit, 3 1/3 stops. So it may be that the filter's not quite as strong as expected. I don't know. That'll be something to test out again in some of the other shots. So that's my basic quality test done. Now it's time to take it out and do some actual proper photography with it. To do some creative tests with this filter, I've come out to one of my kind of go-to locations, the water wheel at Formentera del Segura. So we've got water and wet surfaces and bright sunlight, so I can test the circular polarizer's ability to remove the glare. And we've got movement both in the water and the wheel, so I can test out the ND filter's capabilities in terms of slowing that down and creating motion blur for a creative effect. The only thing I'm not too sure about is whether I can actually test out what the black mist diffusion filter does in this scene. I guess we'll have to see. Let's get the camera out, see what we can do. All right, to start, I've got the ND filter on 1 stop, which is the lowest it will go, and I'm going to try getting some shots using the polarizer to take glare out of the wet surfaces. It's very difficult to see the effect of a polarizer if you're wearing polarizing sunglasses.
All of the images are, of course, after post-processing. This first one was shot with the ND filter at its minimum setting, which is 1 stop, and with the circular polarizer adjusted so that it took out the glare and hot spots coming off of the splashing water and the wet wood of the water wheel. And it's done a good job of doing that. It also added a little bit of contrast and saturation into the sky, although I've added to that in post-processing.
I think I'll try some zoomed in shots as well, just to look at getting the glare out of the scene with the polarizer.
For this second one, I zoomed in, opened the aperture up, increased shutter speed and ISO to freeze movement, and adjusted the circular polarizer for the different orientation of the image, and again it's done a good job of taking out the glare. There's none of the little hot spots that I would otherwise have seen on that splashing water, and I actually think this makes for quite an interesting, almost abstract image.
Now I think what we want to do is try for a longer exposure. So what I'm going to do is unlock this dial, and you know what, I'm just going to dial it all the way over to 5 stops. There we go, 5 stops. Now the thing is, it is still really bright here, and 5 stops is only letting me get down to the 20th of a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the camera's built-in live ND as well.
For this image, as I mentioned, I chose to use the full stopping power of the physical filter, so that's 5 stops, plus the circular polarizer effect to take the glare out. But because I wanted a longer exposure than I could get that way, I added to that with 3 stops of live ND, which is the in-camera computational ND filter. And it's done a good job. Quite happy with the effect that it's produced. Of course, I could have achieved the same exposure time, not by using the live ND filter, but by closing down the aperture, which is what I did in this one. This was a shot at f14 instead of f5, and it's had the same basic effect, although the view is slightly tighter than in the first image.
Okay, so they've been doing a load of work here, clearing a load of the vegetation around the sides of the river. That's to make sure that, as you're into the stormy season, that the river has room to rise without getting clogged up, to avoid flooding nearby areas. What it does mean is it means I've been able to get an angle on the water wheel that I've never been able to get to before. But whether it's actually going to make for an interesting image or not, I don't know. We'll have to see. I tried once before to get down to the bottom of the water wheel and couldn't, but now I kind of can. Now the only problem with shooting from this side is the sun is directly above the water wheel, which is going to be tricky. But I'm going to try a shot. I've still got the filter on, using the filter to hopefully take the glare out, particularly off the top of the water wheel. I really don't know if this is working at all. Try a longer exposure, dial in the ND filter to 5 stops.
This image was always going to be a challenge. Originally I'd intended to shoot this with just the physical filter, but that meant going to f14, and with the way the light was coming in from directly above the scene in front of me, that was causing a lot of problems with flare. Smaller apertures do tend to suffer more with flare than larger apertures. It's also quite possible that the black mist filter was contributing to some of the flare effect, although I did do a quick view with the filter off and the flare was definitely still present, particularly with the small aperture. I could reduce the flare by opening the aperture up, but then I had to go over to the live ND, again 3 stops, to get the exposure time that I wanted of half a second, and that's what I did. Even so, the image was somewhat messy, shall we say, and I decided to have a little play with it and create this slightly extreme black and white edit that for some reason I actually quite like.
Well, I think I've done quite a few interesting tests on this filter. The one thing I really haven't done yet is seen the effect of the black mist diffusion filter, and for that I think we're going to have to go out in some different conditions. Welcome to the evening, or more accurately, a completely different evening. This is another day and I've popped out after sunset because I want to get a scene with some artificial lights to check out the function of this black mist filter. Now, unusually, I've actually got the camera on a tripod. I don't use that very often nowadays. And I've done that because I want to get some consistency between the images without the filter and with. So the scene I'm actually going to be capturing is the church here with the lights on. Yeah, I've definitely timed this wrong, haven't I? We'll wait a few seconds until the coach disappears. Always the challenge shooting on street scenes. All right, let's do a shot without the filter on. And now we're going to do a shot with the filter on, so I need to fit the filter. The filter is on, and I'm going to make sure that the polarizer isn't cutting out any glare. And take the shot.
This is the first image without the filter, and it looks pretty normal without any special effect around the lights. And this is the second one with the black mist filter installed. As I said, I had to make sure that the polarizer wasn't cutting out any glare, because the black mist filter basically needs that glare to create its effect. And you can clearly see this bloom and diffusion around the bright light and spreading out across the brighter parts of the image. The different types of filters, circular polarizer, variable neutral density and black mist filter, have performed pretty much exactly as I expected. The optical quality on this is very, very good, excellent. No drop in image quality, no color cast, very, very nice. The build quality also is very, very nice. There is one thing that I will point out which might be a potential weakness, and that's on this little locking knob. There is a little tiny plastic washer, which I do wonder might be a potential point of failure in the future. Probably not in a matter of months, but maybe after a few years it might fail. If it does, I suspect it would be relatively easy to find something to replace it, but it is something worth bearing in mind. So who will benefit from a filter like this? If you're a photographer and you already own a circular polarizing filter and you already own ND filters, this is not for you. This is not something you're going to buy, I'm fairly sure. You would either buy just a standalone black mist filter if you want a black mist effect, or you'd add such an effect in post-processing. If, however, you don't already have filters, this is actually quite a nice, neat little package to get a multitude of creative options in a single device. And as I haven't invested in filters for my OM system setup, just using a circular polarizer that I already had occasionally, this could prove to be quite useful, and it's going to be in my camera bag going forwards. So if you don't have filters and you're looking to get a polarizer and some ND filters and some other creative stuff, this might be a good option for you. The people that I think would really benefit from this are filmmakers. Probably not just vloggers, but people who are actually making more creative films, because you can use the ND filter to control exposure for video, you can use the polarizer to remove glare from video, and of course you can use the black mist filter for that cinematic effect in the right conditions. All in all, it's a very nice filter, and if you're interested in it, there is a link in the video description that will take you to the K&F website if you want to buy it. And there is a 20% discount code.
this one here, that you can use to get 20% off of anything on the K&F website from now until the end of 2026, when the discount code expires. I'd like to thank K&F for sending this through to me and for providing me with a discount code, which is always nice to be able to offer. And I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a like. If you've enjoyed it and you want to let me know about your experiences with filters, or if you have any questions about this filter, then please leave me a comment. And if you're new here and you've enjoyed this and you want to see more of my stuff, don't forget to hit subscribe before you go. Thank you very much for watching, and until the next video, bye.